The cold on Epsilon 9 never stopped. It crept through the walls of the outpost, slipped under doors, and settled into bones like a slow poison. Outside, the sky was black, dotted with stars that gave no warmth. The moon had no sun of its own, only the distant pale glow of a gas giant hanging in the sky like a silent watcher. Inside Outpost Theta, the air smelled of sweat, burnt wiring, and fear. 47 days had passed since the Cathar Dominion cut them off. No messages got in. No ships came. The comms array was gone, blown apart in the first orbital strike. Now the only sounds were the groan of stressed metal, the hiss of failing life support, and the quiet coughs of the wounded. The garrison wasn't large, just 127 souls from 6 different species. There were the tall, slender Virelians with their silver eyes, the hulking Grak with thick hides and soft voices, a few nervous Lumen who glowed faintly in the dark, and even 2 humans, Lieutenant Mara Chen and Engineer Beniko Sato. They had all come to Epsilon 9 for science, for peace, for study. Not for war, but war had found them anyway. The Cathar didn't announce their arrival. They simply appeared in orbit, dark ships shaped like jagged teeth, and began firing. Their message was clear: surrender or die. The outpost refused, so the siege began. At first they held hope. The Interstellar Concord would send help. They had treaties. They had promises. But as days turned to weeks, those promises turned to silence. Supplies ran low. Food was rationed to half portions. Water was recycled so many times it tasted like metal. Oxygen levels dropped just enough to make everyone dizzy by midday. Captain Vrel of the Virelians, the ranking officer, tried to keep order. He held daily briefings in the mess hall, now used as a triage center. "Hold the line," he'd say, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Aid is coming." But even he stopped saying that after day 32. Now on day 47, the walls were failing. A direct hit 3 nights ago had cracked the eastern dome. They'd sealed it with emergency foam and scrap metal, but cold still seeped in. 2 Grak had frozen to death trying to patch a secondary breach. Their bodies lay wrapped in thermal sheets near the reactor room. Too dangerous to move, too sad to bury. Mara Chen sat on a crate near the med bay, cleaning her sidearm for the 10th time. It wouldn't do much against Cathar plasma cannons, but it made her feel less helpless. Beniko was across the room, rewiring a broken heater with parts from a food synthesizer. "You think they'll come today?" Beniko asked, not looking up. Mara shook her head. "No, maybe tomorrow." "Beniko, they're not coming." He finally looked at her. His face was pale, eyes sunken. "Then why are we still fighting?" "Because if we stop," she said quietly, "they win before they even step inside." Outside, the sky flashed. Another bombardment. The floor shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Someone screamed as a support beam groaned. Then silence again, except for the wind howling through the broken dome like a ghost. In the command center, Captain Vrel stared at a blank screen. The last transmission they'd sent was 3 weeks ago. No rescue possible. Prepare for final stand. He hadn't wanted to send it, but truth was better than false hope. Now he wondered if he'd been wrong. Maybe hope, even false, was all they had left. A young Lumen named Kess approached him, her soft blue light flickering. "Sir, the children are asking if the stars will save us." Vrel knelt, though his joints ached. "The stars don't save anyone, Kess. People do." "But there are no people coming." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Down in the lower levels, the last of the medics, a Grak named Torv, was stitching a wound on a Virelian child. His thick fingers moved gently despite the blood on his claws. "You'll be fine," he rumbled. "Just stay still." The child nodded, eyes wide. "Will my mom come back?" Torv paused. Her mother had died in the second strike. He lied. Yes, soon. He hated lying. But sometimes lies were kinder than truth. Back in the mess hall, Mara and Beniko shared a single protein bar, split into 4 pieces. They ate in silence. No jokes, no stories. Just chewing slowly, to make it last. "You know," Beniko said finally, "back on Earth, my grandmother used to say that when things get darkest, that's when you see the brightest lights." Mara smiled faintly. "Yeah, I've heard that too. Do you think it's true?" She looked toward the cracked dome, where the black sky pressed in like a weight. "I don't know. But if it's not, then we're already dead." A new sound broke the quiet. Not the boom of cannons, but a low, deep hum. The kind that vibrated in your chest. Everyone froze. What is that? Someone whispered. Mara stood, hand on her weapon. It's not the Cathar. Their engines whined. This is different. The hum grew louder, stronger. It wasn't coming from orbit. It was coming from deep space, from the abyss between stars. For the first time in weeks, someone dared to hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe you might live, and if you believed that, dying hurt even more still. They listened. And in that cold, broken place, the sound didn't feel like death. It felt like something else, something coming. Across the galaxy, in the great meeting halls of the interstellar Concord, nothing moved fast. The Concord was made up of many species, some old, some wise, some afraid. They met in a huge ring-shaped station that floated near a quiet star. Inside, the air was clean, the lights were soft, and the floors were so smooth they felt like glass. For weeks, they had talked about Epsilon 9. At first, voices were loud. "We must help them," cried the Varelian delegate. "They are under attack." But others shook their heads. The Cathar Dominion was strong, very strong. To send ships would mean war, and war cost lives, money, and peace. "We cannot risk the whole alliance for one small outpost," said the Grak ambassador, his voice low and careful. "But it is not just an outpost," argued the Lumen speaker, her light dimming with sadness. "It is a symbol. If we do nothing, the Cathar will take more, and more." Still the votes did not come. Day after day the council met. They asked for reports. They studied maps. They waited for more information. But there was no more information. The line was dead. Epsilon 9 was silent. By day 30 the mood had changed. Now the talks were quieter. "It is likely too late," someone said. "Even if we sent help now, they would arrive to ruins." So the Concord made a choice, not with a vote, but with silence. They stopped talking about Epsilon 9. They moved on to trade routes, to mining rights, to border disputes. The outpost became a memory. A sad one, but a small one. Far away on a blue-green planet called Earth, things were different. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They had only joined the Concord 10 years ago. Many older species still saw them as loud, emotional, and reckless. "They act before they think," the Varelians would say. "They fight when they should talk," the Grak would mutter. But on Earth, people watched the news. They saw the reports, how Epsilon 9 had been cut off, how no one was going to help. And they were angry. In the United Sol Defense Command, a building buried deep under the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Lena Cruz stared at a wall of screens. One showed the last known image of Epsilon 9, a frozen dome under a black sky. Another showed the Cathar fleet sitting in orbit like vultures. Her officers stood around her, silent. "We offered help," said Commander Reyes. The Concord said no. "They called our plan too risky." Cruz didn't look at him. "And what do you think?" "I think—" "We can't just leave them." She finally turned. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "The Concord won't act. The Cathar won't stop. And those people on Epsilon 9? They're dying while we fill out forms." No one argued. That night a secret meeting was held. Not in a grand hall, but in a small room with no windows. Only trusted officers were there. No recordings, no logs, just voices in the dark. "We can't get official approval," Cruz said, "but we can get a ship ready, quietly." "The Aegis," someone said. "She's fast, tough, and she's already in dry dock." "The crew?" asked another. "Volunteers only," Cruz said. "No orders. No names on paper. If they say yes, they go knowing they might not come back. And if they're caught, Earth will deny everything." There was a long pause. Then one by one, hands went up. Captain Elias Rourke was the first to step forward. He was in his 50s with a face full of scars and eyes that had seen too much war, but never a war where you just watched people die. He had lost friends on Mars during the dust uprising. He knew what it meant to be left behind. "I'll take her," he said simply. Preparations began that same night. The Aegis was pulled from maintenance. Her engines were tuned. Her weapons were loaded, not with standard rounds, but with special EMP shells and drone pods designed to confuse enemy sensors. Engineers worked in silence, welding, testing, checking. Food, water, medical kits. Everything was packed for a long, hard run. No extra weight. No comforts. Just what was needed to get there, fight, and maybe get back. On the crew list, 312 names were written by hand. Humans from every corner of Earth and its colonies. Some were young, fresh out of training. Some were old veterans who should have retired. All of them knew the risk. None of them backed out. One young pilot, barely 20, asked Rourke before boarding, "Sir, do you really think we can save them?" Rourke looked at the stars through the hangar window. "I don't know if we can save them," he said, "but I know we have to try. Because if we don't, who will?" The ship left Earth orbit under cover of a solar flare. No fanfare, no send-off, just a quiet slip into the dark. As the Aegis jumped into deep space, the crew strapped in. No music played. No speeches were made. They just sat, hearts pounding, staring at the void ahead. Back at the Concorde station, no one noticed. They were too busy debating tax rates on helium-3 exports. But out in the black, something was moving. Something small. Something human. And it was heading straight for the storm. While the galaxy waited and watched and worried about rules, a single ship, loaded with hope, fury, and stubborn courage, began its ghost run through the abyss. No one expected it. No one believed it could work. But that had never stopped humans before. The Aegis moved like a shadow through space. No lights, no radio signals, just a dark shape slipping between stars, riding paths no one else dared to take. These were not safe routes. They were full of gravity wells, dust clouds, and broken asteroids left over from ancient battles. But they were also empty, ignored by patrols, forgotten by maps. Perfect for a ship that did not want to be seen. Inside, the crew lived in near silence. Talking was kept to whispers. Lights were dimmed to red. Even footsteps were soft, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. They had been traveling for 18 days. Food was simple. Paste from tubes, hard crackers, recycled water that tasted faintly of metal. Sleep came in short shifts, always with one eye open. Captain Elias Rourke walked the halls every night. He checked on his people. He saw the worry in their eyes, the tired lines on their faces. But he also saw something else, determination. They knew what they were doing was against orders. They knew Earth would deny them if they were caught. But they also knew why they were here. Not for glory, not for medals, but because someone had to go. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Tanya Wu worked nonstop. Her hands were always greasy, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She had rebuilt the slipstream drive 3 times already, using parts from old storage lockers and spare wiring. "She's not pretty," she'd told Rourke, "but she'll get us there." And she did. Up in the cockpit, young pilot Javi Mendez watched the stars blur past. He had never flown this deep before. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart raced every time a sensor pinged. So far, they had avoided 3 Cathar patrols by hiding behind dead comets and drifting like space junk. Each time, the crew held their breath until the danger passed. They were not fighting yet. Not really. This was the quiet part, the part before the storm. And it was the hardest. Rourke gathered the crew on day 15. Not in the mess hall, but in the cargo bay, where the air was cold and the walls were lined with crates. He stood on a crate himself so they could all see him. "We're close now," he said. "In 3 days we reach the Epsilon system. You all know what's waiting for us. The Cathar don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. And they won't expect us." He looked at their faces, some young, some old, all human. "If any of you want off this mission, say so now. No shame. I'll drop you at the nearest neutral station. No one will know." No one moved. No one spoke. Then Mara Chen's voice came over the comms. She had been patched in from a secure channel before they left Earth. Her message was short. "They're still alive, barely, but they're holding on." That was all they needed to hear. Preparations began in earnest. Marines checked their armor. Medics packed field kits. Drone operators loaded swarms into launch tubes, tiny machines that looked like metal insects, designed to confuse enemy sensors and overload targeting systems. Weapons officers tested railguns, making sure each round would fly true. Rourke spent hours studying the Cathar fleet layout. He knew their ships were bigger, stronger, more advanced. But humans had always won by being smarter, faster, and willing to take risks no one else would. "We don't need to beat them," he told his tactical team. "We just need to break their focus long enough to get the survivors out." One night, as the ship drifted near a dead star, Rourke sat alone in his cabin. He held a small photo, his daughter smiling on a beach back on Earth. She was only 10. He hadn't told her he was going. He couldn't, but he hoped if he didn't come back, she would understand. Outside, the void stretched forever. Cold, empty, endless. But the Aegis was not empty. It was full of people who refused to let others die alone. On day 18, the sensors picked up the first real sign, a faint energy spike from the Epsilon system. Cathar comms traffic, orbital weapons charging. They were preparing for something, maybe a final assault. Rourke gave the order. Bring us out of ghost mode. Power up weapons. Set course for Epsilon 9. Full silent run until we hit the outer belt. The ship hummed to life. Lights brightened. Engines warmed. The crew strapped in, hearts pounding. They were no longer hiding. They were coming. In the final hours, no one slept. They checked gear. They wrote quick notes to loved ones. Some prayed. Some just stared out the viewports at the stars. Javi whispered an old Earth saying to himself, "Fortune favors the bold." Tanya tightened one last bolt and wiped her hands on her pants. Let's go save some lives. And deep in the ship, the wolf's howl was loaded into the comm system, a sound recorded from Earth's wild places, raw and ancient. Rourke had chosen it himself, not as a weapon, but as a message. We are here. We are human, and we do not leave our own behind. The Aegis turned its nose toward Epsilon 9. Engines flared blue. Space bent around it, and from the abyss it began its final run, fast, fierce, and full of fire. The Cathar were ready to finish it. Their ground troops stood at the last breach in Outpost Theta's dome, plasma rifles humming. Inside, the survivors huddled near the reactor room, cold, hungry, and out of hope. Captain Vrel held a broken rifle. Mara Chen stood beside him, her sidearm nearly empty. Beniko clutched a wrench like it was a weapon. They knew this was the end. Then the sky screamed. It wasn't a sound from space. Space has no sound. But the Aegis sent its message through every working speaker, every broken comm unit, every helmet radio in the outpost. A deep wild howl, like wolves on an ancient Earth night, ripped through the air. It echoed off the ice walls, shook the metal floors, and froze the Cathar soldiers in place. Before they could react, the black sky split open. The Aegis dropped out of slipstream like a blade from the dark. Its engines burned cobalt blue, lighting up the frozen moon for the first time in weeks. It didn't come in slow or careful. It came in fast, loud, and angry. The Cathar ships in orbit turned, surprised. They had seen no warning, no approach, nothing. But here it was, a human warship, small but sharp, diving straight toward them. Captain Rourke's voice boomed over open comms, calm but firm. "This is the UNS Aegis. You have 10 seconds to stand down, or we burn you from the sky." The Cathar did not answer. They fired. Plasma bolts streaked toward the Aegis, but the ship rolled hard, dodging like a fighter in an old Earth dogfight. Then it struck back. First it launched its drone swarm, hundreds of tiny machines that scattered like sparks. They latched onto Cathar sensors, blinding them, feeding false readings. One Cathar frigate fired at empty space, thinking it saw a fleet. Then came the railguns, not with explosive rounds, but with EMP-charged slugs. The first shot hit a Cathar cruiser's bridge. Lights died. Systems went dark. The ship drifted, helpless. The second shot punched through a frigate's engine core. It exploded in a silent burst of fire. But the Aegis wasn't done. Rourke gave one more order, ramming speed. The ship turned hard and charged straight at the largest Cathar vessel, a command ship hovering over the outpost. Alarms blared inside the Aegis. Hull stress warnings flashed red, but the crew held firm. With a crunch that echoed through space like thunder, the Aegis slammed into the enemy ship's side. Metal tore. Atmosphere hissed out. The Cathar ship listed, broken, and began to fall toward the moon's surface. On the ground, the Cathar soldiers panicked. Their command was gone. Their ships were failing, and now, human drop pods were falling from the sky like shooting stars. They hit the ice with a thud. Hatches blew open. Marines in black exosuits poured out, weapons raised. They moved fast in pairs, shouting over comms, "Clear left! Moving to dome breach! Cover the evac point!" Mara Chen heard the voices and almost cried. She recognized the accent. Earth. Home. One Marine reached her, helmet off. A young woman with a scar across her cheek. "Lieutenant Chen? We're getting you out." Mara nodded, too stunned to speak. The Marines formed a line between the survivors and the confused Cathar troops. They fired not to kill but to push back using stun rounds and flash grenades. The Cathar, used to slow, formal battles, were overwhelmed by the chaos. Humans didn't fight fair. They fought to win. Inside the outpost, Beniko helped carry the wounded. Torv the Grak lifted 2 children onto a stretcher. Captain Vrel stared at the human Marines in awe. "You came," he whispered. "We always do," said a Marine, reloading his rifle. Up above, the Aegis was badly hurt. Its left wing was torn. Fires burned in 2 compartments, but it still flew. Javi wrestled the controls, keeping the ship steady while Tanya shouted damage reports from below. Life support failing in sections 3 and 5. Port thruster offline. "We're leaking oxygen." Rourke didn't flinch. "Keep her in the air. We're not leaving until everyone's out." Shuttles launched from the Aegis' belly, small, fast, built for ice landings. They touched down near the dome, ramps opening. Survivors ran, helped by Marines. The Lumen children clung to each other, their soft light flickering with fear and wonder. One Cathar soldier raised his weapon at a group of fleeing scientists. Before he could fire, a human Marine tackled him into the snow. They rolled, fighting in silence until the Marine stood up, breathing hard. He didn't kill the Cathar. He just knocked him out and dragged him aside. "Not today," the Marine muttered. Back on the Aegis, the last shuttle lifted off. 89 survivors were aboard. Alive, cold, but safe. Rourke gave the order. All teams returned to ship. "We're leaving." The Marines sprinted back, some carrying the wounded, others covering the retreat. The last one jumped into the final shuttle just as Cathar reinforcements arrived from the far side of the moon. But it was too late. The Aegis turned, engines roaring, and shot upward. It left behind smoke, fire, and silence. Below, the Cathar stood in the snow, watching the human ship vanish into the stars. They had expected fear. They had expected surrender. They had not expected wolves, and they would not forget the howl. The Aegis limped home. Its hull was scarred, its engines coughing, and half its systems ran on backup power. Smoke still curled from a breach near the cargo bay, but it flew, and inside, 89 survivors from Epsilon 9 slept, ate real food for the first time in weeks, and cried quietly in the dim light of the med bay. Back on Earth, news spread fast. Not through official channels, those stayed silent, but through whispers, private messages, and leaked sensor logs. People saw the footage, the howl, the ramming strike, the Marines dragging children through the snow. They saw Captain Rourke's face on a smuggled comms feed, tired but proud, and they cheered, but not everyone was happy. At the Interstellar Concord, the mood was tense. The rescue had worked, but it had also broken every rule. The Cathar were furious. They called it an act of war. The Concord Council met in emergency session. Some delegates demanded Earth be punished. They acted alone. They risked galactic peace, shouted the Grak ambassador, but others stayed quiet. The Varelian delegate watched the rescue video again and again. She saw her people, alive, being carried to safety by humans who asked for nothing in return. The Lumen speaker stood and said, "If this is recklessness, then give me more of it." Still, Earth had to answer for what it did. Captain Rourke was called to stand before a military court. He wore his uniform, though it was torn and stained. He did not deny his actions. "I took the Aegis without orders," he said plainly. "I broke protocol. I risked war. But I saved lives. And I would do it again." The court was silent for a long time. Then the lead judge, an old admiral with 3 wars behind him, spoke. "You disobeyed direct orders. That cannot go unpunished," he paused. "But you also showed what it means to be human." The sentence was light, 30 days confinement, no rank loss. A slap on the wrist wrapped in respect. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. The full Concord Council gathered again, not in anger, but in honor. They invited Rourke, his crew, and the rescued survivors. In the great hall under the soft glow of 1,000 star maps, the council speaker stepped forward. She was a Varelian elder, her silver eyes wet with tears. "Long ago," she said, "we thought humans were too wild, too loud, too quick to fight. We were wrong. You did not wait for permission to do what was right. You did not count the cost before saving strangers. That is not recklessness. That is courage. Then she placed the Galactic Cross of Valor, the highest honor in the Concorde, around Rourke's neck. The room erupted in applause. Even the GRAC ambassador clapped slowly at first, then harder. But the real change happened quietly in the weeks that followed. Alien ships began docking at human stations, not for trade, but for talk. Young Varelians signed up for joint training with Earth Marines. GRAC engineers asked to study human drone tech. The Lumen sent artists to paint murals of the Aegis on their city walls. On Epsilon 9, the outpost was not abandoned. It was rebuilt, stronger, larger, with a new name, Hope Station. At its center stood a simple stone memorial, not just for those who died, but for the moment the galaxy learned that help could come from the darkest places, carried by those who refused to look away. Back on Earth, children played in parks pretending to be Aegis pilots. Schools added the rescue to their history lessons, and in a small town in Colorado, a 10-year-old girl named Lila watched a news clip of her father standing before the Concorde. She didn't understand all the words, but she saw the medal on his chest and the way people looked at him, not with fear, but with thanks. Mara Chen and Beniko Sato stayed in the service. They trained new recruits, telling them, "It's not about how big your ship is. It's about whether you're willing to go when no one else will." The Cathar did not attack again, not right away. They had learned something too, that humans might be small, but they were not alone. And when they moved together. Years later, when new crises came, lost colonies, pirate raids, natural disasters, it was often a human ship that arrived first. Not because they were the strongest, but because they remembered Epsilon 9. They remembered the cold, the silence, the howl in the dark, and they remembered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up. No one had expected the Aegis, no one had believed humans would dare. But they did. And in doing so, they changed everything, not by winning a war, but by proving that even in the vast, cold universe, someone might still come for you, just because you're worth saving.